and welcome to 7 Days. I'm Maeve O'Meara. In the wake of the Port Arthur massacre, gun law reform has continued to dominate national news. And our guest tonight has been a key player in the debate this week. Co-convener of the Coalition for Gun Control, lobby group with members in New South Wales and Tasmania, and Associate Professor of Public Health and Community Medicine at the University of Sydney, Professor Simon Chapman. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Maeve.
Last Friday, police ministers from around the country met in Canberra and hammered out an agreement on national gun laws, banning the importation, sale, resale, transfer, possession, manufacture and use of a wide range of automatic and semi-automatic weapons. Australia's first comprehensive ruling on gun control still allows farmers to hold a licence for low-powered .22 self-loading and pump-action rifles. The gun lobby, though, is firmly resisting the changes.
When police ministers arrived in Canberra on Friday, many were still hoping to water down the federal government's tough proposals.
Well, I don't think anything's not negotiable in the political arena.
Every minister is coming here to achieve a result, and if that means that some people are going to have to move positions, then so be it.
Others were more concerned about who would pay for any gun amnesty.
We have no money. We don't have any money to contribute to buyback, so the Commonwealth's going to have to come up with the money.
But the Prime Minister, in his first leadership test, held firm his resolve to bring the states into line, and after an exhaustive 8 hours of meetings, emerged victorious.
I'm very happy to announce that the Commonwealth and the states and territories have agreed on a uniform and much tougher approach to gun laws, which will, in our view, make Australia a much safer place in which to live.
The tough new laws include a complete ban on automatic and semi-automatic weapons, with limited exceptions. But this weekend, an angry gun lobby vowed to fight the changes, with plans for nationwide protests and legal action.
We're not going to take it lying down, and we are going to have to fight, and we are going to have probably mass rallies, meetings, demonstrations.
Gun shop owners say they'll be looking for compensation from the federal government for loss of business.
$2 million per gun dealer, because Mr. Howard is destroying our business for years to come.
The states are arguing they can't afford a buyback of banned weapons and may seek a levy of $30 per adult as a solution.
It's going to be a significant cost on the community, there's no doubt about that. There are a lot of these guns out there.
But at week's end, the only clear consensus seems to be that the new laws won't be easy to enforce.
Well, SBS News last night ran a story that John Major's looking at Australia's stance on gun laws, so it seems that perhaps by week's end, John Howard is not just a national hero, but an international one as well.
I think John Howard's achievement in this regard has been absolutely remarkable. I think that he's probably restored an immense amount of faith to the political process, and I think also the police ministers from right around the country, and especially Darryl Williams, the Attorney General, I think they'll go down in history really as being men of history in introducing this. It's one of the biggest things in public health.
You were in Canberra on Friday. Do you consider it a personal victory as well?
Oh, look, my role in it is insignificant compared to many of the people who for years and years have been pushing this. I guess that collectively the message has finally come through. The biggest achievement is the achievement of bipartisanship, political bipartisanship here, which we've been arguing for years and years. Finally, we've got it.
It's going to be monstrous to try and police, isn't it? I mean, less than half the guns in the country are licensed. How can they be tracked down?
I think that the registration system will really only succeed if the government accompanies it with a sort of an Operation Noah scheme where that people can report people that they know who have guns who've refused to register them. And I think that if they do that and they're genuine about the tough penalties, then I think it will succeed admirably.
Do you have any idea how many guns there are in Australia?
No, we don't, and the gun lobby doesn't either. I think they talk it up a lot because they like to sort of make out that a lot of the population have guns, but frankly we don't know how many there are, and neither do they, because there isn't a national gun register and there never has been.
Well, talking about registering, is registration any guarantee against violence?
Whatever measures you were to introduce, I mean, if you were to ban guns altogether, there would still be people who would be able to get hold of them. There would still be incidents. But we've got to look at the wider picture. Australia, with 18 million people, has about 520 gun deaths a year. Japan, with 124 million, has only 34 deaths, and they have the toughest gun laws in the world. Britain, very tough laws. They've only got 70 deaths. That's the sort of direction we want to head in, not in the American direction, as John Howard said.
We've seen that no government up till now has had the will to take on the gun lobby. How strong are they?
I think there's a lot of bluster and bluffing the gun lobby's power. They've only been powerful as long as they've been able to play one party off against another. But now that there is political bipartisanship, frankly, I think that the gun lobby's power has probably been gelded. They are not going to be a force on their own for as long as bipartisanship persists.
Although they say that they have become even stronger with this debate, that in fact disparate groups have now been galvanised into action.
Well, there's a lot of tough talk again, but it remains to be seen whether they can translate that into any political mass appeal. 90% plus of the population in every opinion poll that's been conducted for the last 5 years has shown overwhelming support for gun control. And the best that they'd ever been able to do electorally through the Shooters Party is just over 2%.
Well, you were saying before that people will still try and get hold of guns. A black market is sure to develop as a result of the new laws.
There will be a black market, but the point that has to be made about that is that the distribution system for military-style guns through a black market will be far less efficient than being able to walk into a gun shop in Queensland or Tasmania and just buy one over the counter.
And do you believe that an Operation Noah-style thing will help that along as well?
I think that, but also I think there is a big need for a community education campaign, not just about guns, but about violence in the community, about the abhorrence of this event, and getting people to reflect on what it means for our national character.
Well, there's talk of a levy on Australia's 10 million taxpayers between $30 and $80. Do you believe people are going to be happy to come forward with that money?
I think at the end of the day, it's a very small price to pay. It's a restaurant meal, it's a new pair of shoes or something like that. It's not much to ask for the price for community safety. But frankly, I think that gun owners themselves ought to be in the forefront of that cost.
Yeah, you yourself have an idea of a one-off levy of $300 per shooter.
Well, I mean, boat owners have to pay boat fees, mooring fees, car drivers have to pay registration fees, licence fees, parking fees even. I don't see any argument at all why gun owners should not have to pay registration fees and licence fees. It only makes sense to me, and that if you were to put all that money together for the guns which will still be legally available in the community, it will bring in an awful lot of money.
Do you believe, though, it will stop people wanting to register their guns if they have this huge amount that they have to pay?
There will be some people who will say, well, damn it, you know, I'm not going to pay $300, I'm just going to keep quiet about it. But if the government's serious about this and they attach very, very strong penalties to this, I'm talking here of many thousands of dollars, not just a slap on the wrist, and if they accompany it by an Operation Noah exercise, then I think that people will think twice about it and they'll wonder whether it's all worth the risk.
Why do you think people that own guns are so reluctant to give them up?
I think that many people who own guns will be very happy to oblige with this. The opinion polls that have been conducted amongst gun owners show that a big majority of them, 70% plus, support gun registration and some of these sensible measures. I think the ones who say we're going to defy this, the ones who are up in arms about it, as it were, I think are a very small minority of gun owners. So the problem will be there, but I don't think it's going to be as significant as the gun lobby are trying to make out.
Although gun publications talk about their concerns for a one-world government, that they are very much against that. They see the home as the fortress. Is this something that you've come across?
I think that there is a very small section in the gun-owning community who see their gun as almost like a security blanket, and they're very fearful of giving it up. They have these fanciful, quite hysterical notions that invading armies are going to drip down from the north, and Dad's Army style, they're going to defend the country. I think that, you know, it's nonsense for anybody who knows about the strategic defence in 1996 to be talking that way. And it's nonsense that such notions should govern the availability of guns in a country like Australia.
Yeah, if we can move on, the debate this week also focused on the ugly question of domestic violence and the use of guns in those situations. As if to underline the point, this week saw a number of examples of guns used in anger against spouses. In one case, a Sydney man chased his wife down the street with his gun, firing at her. She later died in hospital, and he then turned the gun on himself.
It's estimated 1 in 4 Australian women are subjected to domestic violence. Bureau of Statistics figures from 1995 show that 1/4 of all homicides are spouse killings, and almost 41% of those are victims of gunshot wounds. On Tuesday morning, a Sydney woman was shot by her husband of 35 years, who then turned the gun on himself. Both died later in hospital. On Thursday night, 2 men died from gunshot wounds during a domestic dispute in inner Sydney. A third man was charged on 2 counts of murder the next day. In Brisbane, a man who had shot a 16-year-old intruder last year has had a manslaughter charge against him dropped. Earlier this year, a Western Australian study showed that domestic violence against women is far more prevalent in rural and poor Aboriginal families. However, a thorough national survey of domestic violence is yet to be undertaken in Australia.
Well, Professor, if there were a national survey on domestic violence to be taken, how largely would guns figure, do you think?
I think they'd be quite a significant factor. I know that people associated with the Coalition for Gun Control who work in domestic violence report that many women say that the men that they live with, that they've had to run away from, have threatened them with guns, that they take out the gun and ostentatiously clean it in front of them, they threaten to use it on them, they're always bringing it up in conversation, that sort of thing. So I think that it's one of the big areas.
And in a more general sense, how much are guns a public health issue?
Well, with over 500 gun deaths in this country each year, there are more people die at the hand of a gun than, for example, die from AIDS or cervical cancer. It's about 1/4 of the road toll. That gives some sort of dimension to the problem. 80% of it is suicide, and the remainder is mostly sort of homicides, with a very, very small fraction, about 4%, being accidental injuries.
You mentioned suicide. Should that be part of the debate on guns?
Oh, very much so. I mean, if a person uses a gun in a suicide attempt, the awful euphemism that we use in public health is that the completion rate is nearly 100%. If you put a gun to your head and pull the trigger, there's usually no road back, whereas other suicide attempts, for example, with pills, car exhausts and things, that people are often found and are often very, very thankful for having been found. But with a gun, there's no turning back.
On the question of domestic violence, do you believe there should be more protection? A lot of the women, the cases that you read, they've warned for a long, long time of their concerns, their fears for their lives.
Well, there should be. I mean, there's certainly been some attention to that issue, particularly in New South Wales, where domestic violence orders, guns are immediately taken off the person who's subject to that order. But part of the problem has been that without gun registration, the police have never known how many guns to look for when taking the guns away from such people. With registration now, we'll at least have hope of doing that into the future.
On the subject of registration, what would you like to see as the minimum requirements that someone has to produce to own a gun licence?
Well, I think membership, genuine membership of an accredited sport shooting club, where there was a record of their attendance, where they had been accepted into the club and where the club would vouchsafe for the character of that person. people who had a genuine history of hunting, going out into the country areas and hunting animals, and that they could prove that they had done that, or if they were new people wanting to start doing that, that they would have some sort of probationary licence to do that or something like that. And of course professional vermin hunters have been looked after in the exemptions from this Act, and I think that's sensible.
Would you also like to see a full medical and psychiatric history for everybody that owns a gun?
Oh, very much so, but I think that the calls that the gun lobby have had for a national register of what they describe as sort of psychiatrically disturbed people, I think is a ridiculous way to go. The vast majority of people who've been involved in these mass killings have not had any psychiatric record, and many of them have never even been reported to even be sort of acting strangely by neighbours or workmates or so forth. The notion that you can somehow compile a list of everybody who is going to have a propensity for danger is very, very naive and ignorant.
Does that make it even more chilling from your viewpoint?
I think what it means is that the notion that the dangerous ones are out there and we can identify them, that's silly. The notion is that if you have a lot of guns in the community, you are going to have a greater number of sort of gun violence incidents as a result of those guns in the community. And so we have to try and get the arsenal of guns in the community down, and we have to start addressing very seriously how many people really need to own a gun, particularly in cities where, of course, you can't discharge guns.
I'd like to talk about your own story. You grew up with a gun, shooting rabbits in the country. At what stage did you turn against guns?
Yes, I did. I had a rifle of my own. I was in the cadet corps at school. I was in the machine gun squad. I fired Vickers machine guns and Bren guns and so forth. I had that boyhood fascination with guns like a lot of boys do. But I think that when I started thinking about the issue as an adult, and I started realising that the purpose of a gun is actually to kill, and working in hospitals and looking in medical textbooks and occasionally going into accident emergency rooms and seeing the results of gunshot wounds, it really, I mean, it has got no place in a civilised society, particularly, as I said, in urban settings. I can't see any reason for people to keep guns in cities.
So you're saying gun owners perhaps haven't grown up as much as you have?
I think that it's unwise to characterise gun owners as being dangerous people. The great majority of gun owners are not dangerous. They're law-abiding citizens. They're decent people who keep guns for culling animals on their property or for sport and things like that. The difficulty, of course, is we don't know which proportion of those people are dangerous. The gun lobby often says that 99.9% of them are law-abiding, safe and so forth. That means that 0.1 are dangerous. And if you translate that into the community, there are maybe more than 1,000 people out there right now who are dangerous. We don't know who they are, but we need to somehow get guns away from the whole community and reduce the number of guns in the community to make it a safer place.
If we can move on to look at some of the good things that have emerged in the weeks after the Port Arthur massacre. Now, as never before, concerns that have been discussed and worried over are now firmly on the agenda. There's the announcement today that John Howard has set up a ministerial review of the impact of violence on viewers. But there was sadness too this week with some of the funerals of the Port Arthur victims.
As the aftershock of the Port Arthur killings continues, 1,000 mourners attended the service for Nanette, Alana and Madeline Mikak in Melbourne.
Do not take your partner for granted. Do not take your children for granted. Do not take life for granted. And most importantly, do not take tomorrow for granted.
Gun ownership is one of several issues to dominate public debate, but mental health and perceptions of mental illness have also been highlighted, with advocacy groups claiming the number of people seeking admission to psychiatric hospitals has increased, as patients feel they've been singled out for blame over the shootings. The impact of violent films and video games has also been spotlighted, with television networks altering programming schedules after the massacre, replacing aggressive features with lighter films. As the extensive media coverage of the issue continues, there are increasing calls for tighter regulations to limit violent material on television and in film.
Gee, it's chilling stuff. Well, Dustin Hoffman, who's just announced that he will make a series of movies in Australia, launched a scathing attack on Hollywood and drew a parallel between massacres and the violence on the screen. Would you agree with him?
Look, I think that we take for granted the assumption between, for example, political advertising and influencing how people vote, commercial advertising and how people buy things, cigarette advertising and smoking. In my own field, health education campaigns and behaviour change. It's silly, really, that we quarantine the notion that violent images won't have any effect on the way in which people understand violence and see it. But I think it's a very complicated issue, though, because very often violent images are used, I think, to get people to reflect on the horror of violence. Take a film like Schindler's List, that I think caused an immense amount of reflection in the community when it was out. It would be very difficult, in my opinion, to start thinking that such films should be somehow banned or restricted or kept away from people.
Also hard, though, to try and delineate what makes a violent film and useful violence on the screen and something that is gratuitous.
Yeah, I think so. I think that the difficulty, though, in examining those lines ought not to preclude a very, very thorough examination of it. And I'd confidently predict that after this legislation has taken effect, the government, I think, will probably turn its attention to an examination of this. Indeed, there are signs of that happening in Canberra already.
Very much so, yeah, the announcement that a ministerial committee will look at this. Is there anything in particular that they should focus on, in your view?
Well, I think that those questions about whether or not depictions of violence can actually be helpful in getting people to realise the horror of violence, not just an assumption that perhaps violence is something bad that we should never be exposed to, that sort of thing, but also in the area of course, video games. My own children the other night, when I was watching a newscast of this horror in Port Arthur, I heard gunfire coming from the other room and went out, and they were playing one of these games that they had there. And I just think the ubiquity of them, how popular they are, really needs a lot of looking at in our community. As
a health professional, do you have any thoughts on the sorts of people that are triggered by violence on the screen?
No, it's not an area that I'm a specialist in, and I believe psychiatrists tell me that there are no clear answers in this area. But there is enough anecdotal evidence from people who have been found, time and time again after these incidents to have whole caches of violent videos and so forth to make one start thinking, well, maybe there is some sort of relationship there that needs to be looked at.
Well, as we've just seen in the wake of Port Arthur, there's been a rise in the number of people checking into psychiatric hospitals and blaming themselves. Does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't. I've heard that myself. The schizophrenia people in Victoria telling me the other day that, in fact, they've had a lot of calls from people in the fellowship saying that they just feel rotten and miserable at their life. People are making their lives even more miserable. All this talk about blaming the mentally ill for it. If this character in Hobart is found to be mentally ill, I think that will amplify those concerns, but I'd re-emphasise that the great majority of people who do become engaged in these violent incidents have no record whatsoever. So if we were to somehow address solutions to looking at the mentally ill, we would be only addressing the tip of the iceberg.
We've had the gun debate. We're about to have the debate on violence. Do you think there are other aftershocks or other things that will be looked at in the aftermath of Port Arthur?
I just think the whole culture of violence. The New South Wales Rugby League has a huge poster up which shows two front row forwards almost in rutting position, like sort of rams with their foreheads pressed against one another, and the slogan is, "It's on." Now, everybody looks at that and understands that this is a glorification of violence on the football field that a rugby league administration are using to promote sport. And so I think that the discourse on violence which will proceed out of this incident needs to be very, very far-reaching and not just confined to guns.
Finally, that was a very moving speech from Walter Mikac. As a husband and father, how did you react to that?
Well, I think I reacted like probably anybody who has children. I went and talked to my colleagues at the university during the week, and they asked me to come in and explain what was going on politically, and I found myself actually breaking down. I was immensely moved by the photograph in the paper, and I think that the whole community has been moved to tears and to a lot of consideration by this. Something good, hopefully, is going to come out of it, and already has, I think.
Professor Chapman, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Maeve.
And that's it for 7 days.